We've just, in the last year, helped to found a new transitional justice network in Asia. And transitional justice basically meaning and focused on what do you do when your country or context has a history of mass human rights violations, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of killing, rape and torture. There's a transition to some kind of democratic future. What are you going to do about all those crimes and violations? So the first 5 contexts that are the core focus of this new network are Mindanao in the Philippines, southern Thailand, where there's an ongoing conflict, religious-based and historical, ethnic-based as well, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, and Indonesia. So all of those 5 contexts have very intense and strong ongoing needs for a focus. The approach that AJA, we call our organisation, Asia Justice and Rights, our approach is one that we call learning circles. And our overhead flag is unlearning impunity. And we feel that in Asia in particular, impunity is so entrenched, there's a process of unlearning that needs to take place. So the way we do that is, one methodology is what we call learning circles. We identify key partners in, for instance, for this network, the 5 countries, and they all come together, usually at our base in Indonesia. We spend a deep learning process, maybe 7 days together with international experts and national experts, exchanging lessons learned and developing strategies. Each partner goes back to their country with some resources to develop their national learning circle. They then come back to our centre in Indonesia. We deepen the process. They go back into their countries. Gradually we expand it to other countries. But there's a ongoing multi-year learning circle, which is a network of mutual support as well, resources to deepen the knowledge and the strength that we need to build a movement for accountability and against impunity. This is a very difficult situation, and one that relates to many countries in different forms, and that is when you have a long dictatorship, 50 years in Myanmar, 30 years in Indonesia. We've just been looking for some lessons learned in Colombia after 50 years of their conflict. When the military give up power, how much do they give up? And in Myanmar, they haven't given up all of that power. They still have a guaranteed number of seats in parliament. They have a number of ministries that they control. The army is still very strong. So it's a challenge for the civilian government to work in that kind of structure. At the same time, the civilian government's fundamental duty is to protect the population. And that includes the whole population, including those referred to as the Rohingya, and that group mostly in Rakhine State are owed the protection of their government, apart from any political issues or any other issues, and the issue of citizenship needs to be very deeply focused on. But from a human rights perspective, the government needs to protect them. This is similar to many other conflicts. It's a very deep issue. It relates to, there are claims that groups of Rohingya have been in that area for more than 1,000 years. There was an increase in their number during the British colonial time. And in the constitution of Myanmar, they list 135 ethnic groups that have a right to citizenship. The Rohingya are not one of them, and they claim that they should be. The opponents claim that they shouldn't be. These are very difficult issues going back historically. How can we be sure what happened in 1824 at the time the British colonial process began? Because that's the period when an ethnic group is defined as. But, so these people live in this area, that's their history, they need a country. We need to solve that issue, and they need to be provided with a solution so that they're not displaced, so that they don't have houses, so that they're not threatened. This needs to be looked at from a human rights perspective by the government as well, and their duty to protect those persons who live within their boundaries. Mm-hmm. There are many disputes and conflicts in the region called Myanmar or Burma, but I mean, it's a wonderful country. There's an incredibly rich and diverse ethnic makeup. In the vast majority of cases, they've lived in relative harmony for long periods of time. But there are, depending on how many you count, up to 20 armed groups, different ethnic groups, each claiming various rights. And the challenge that Asia Justice and Rights faces is that in all of these situations, we're dealing with the hatred and divisions that are caused by human rights violations. And on both sides, this is always the challenge in a transition. It's very often that a group feels aggrieved because of a lack of development in that area, because they are a minority group which is not paid attention to, they may be a different religion, and then eventually they feel that their peaceful demands are not being met, and some of them, a splinter group, will take up arms. They'll attack the state forces, they'll feel aggrieved, their friends have been killed, they'll attack back. They can't catch the guerrillas, so they may attack their wives and daughters or whatever in the village. They justify that, but for the community that seems like a mass and terrible atrocity. That hatred grows on both sides, and then you're not dealing with the original problem, you're dealing with the flow-on of these human rights violations. And that's what we have to deal with in all of these transitions. How do we find some kind of solution around the mass violations? And that includes hearing from the victims of both sides, to recognize that the suffering on both sides is always a terrible thing, to seek the truth of what actually happened, because it's usually distorted. There needs to be some form of accountability and reform. So we follow that general approach. It's a transitional justice approach in trying to seek solutions for these problems. Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has just been established in Aceh, and AJAR, Asia Justice and Rights, has been supporting the new commissioners so that they understand more about what other truth commissions in South Africa and Peru and East Timor do. I spent 3 years myself as a principal legal counsel on the East Timor Truth Commission, and I've worked in many others across the world. So we've tried to give them a base of understanding what they do. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are a challenge for any society. They can be very successful, I believe, in contributing to healing the past. They won't heal the past, but they'll make a contribution, but only if there's a very broad ownership and buy-in by the population, by civil society organizations and others. It has to be the people's process. It has to be our commission, not their commission. You need to appoint good commissioners who are not politicized and who have a high credibility. And then it involves a lot of hard work. Thailand has a very interesting history and a lot of complex challenges. Right now they're being governed by a military government. So, a primary goal is to have another transition back to democracy. But through many years now, there has been an ongoing insurgency in the south of Thailand. And if you look at Thailand, the majority Buddhist nation then meets up with Malaysia at the south. And then in the Thai territory, there is a group of Muslim Thai who are the Patani ethnic group, who have been struggling for a greater say, perhaps separatist claims in the south, met with very strong repression from the military, human rights violations, ongoing divisions and hatred we need to find a solution to that. And the first step is to stop the violations. And the first step of that is to be able to witness, monitor and report freely on what's taking place. Under the current government, some of the reports about torture and other offences are being met with targeting those who report on them. So this is a similar type of thing that you see all over the world, and it reduces the space for human rights defenders and journalists to report on the truth, which allows violations to grow. So it's a complex mix, but the first step needs to be able to see what's happening, to shine a light into the dark places. And in southern Thailand, violations have been continuing. There have been attacks on both sides. We need to be able to engage with that. The Philippines is another context in which a minority in the Mindanao area in particular has been seeking their demands for, there's a range of demands, but they have felt aggrieved by a lack of what they perceive to be a lack of justice for them, which has been met with various responses from the government, human rights violations and conflict for many decades. And finally, we're very close to a peace accord, but there's been a block of that, a block against that, and not much progress. What we see is in situations where there's not enough attention on accountability and justice, the victim communities become very frustrated. And what's very alarming now is in areas like Mindanao in the Philippines, in southern Thailand, in some parts of Indonesia, that where there is a link to an Islamic-based grievance for a minority group, the lack of attention and the lack of progress on justice and accountability, is the frustration makes that very fertile ground for recruitment by international extremist organizations, which makes their situation more complicated again. And those groups seeking justice don't want also to be lumped in with international extremist organizations who have different goals. But the lesson is that unless we really focus and provide resources and seek solutions for ongoing violations and situations, the costs become higher and higher. So it's much better to work hard at these very difficult solutions on justice. Otherwise, those contexts become more complicated, especially in this modern era where international organizations are also involved.